be a good time to do some voiceover work with this voice
For real.
for a character.
You actually could probably read the Bible, to be honest.
I could.
Like James Earl Jones it.
Brian, we had Dr. Judd Burton on last week.
Oh, yeah.
And we were talking about Bibles. And I remember, I guess it was last year or the year before for Christmas, I found this at Barnes & Noble. It was the James Earl Jones audio Bible. So if you want Mufasa or Darth Vader to read the Bible to you,
that's got to be cool.
It's there. Yeah.
Just almost
Yeah.
as good as Charlton
available.
Heston reading the Bible.
Right.
Because he did that too.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know he did that.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to go back and watch the Ten Commandments. I used to have the VHS version. It was 2 tapes because it was such a long movie.
Yeah.
But I remember watching it as a kid a lot.
Oh, yeah.
You've seen that, haven't you?
No.
What?
No. I had a very bad childhood.
Well, we need to have a marathon.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Never got to see
Watch the Ten
anything.
Commandments.
All those things were scary.
Parting of the Red Sea was scary when I was a kid just because it was so massive in scale. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But really cool, though.
Especially on the big screen.
All right. Well, yes. Well, welcome to The Ancient Way. I'm James.
I'm Marilia.
We have with us once more Brian Godawa. Brian, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on, you guys.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. I'll say a big topic of conversation is your fairly new book, Cruel Logic.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it for the viewers, the audience.
Viewers.
There will be some viewers if we release the video about Cruel Logic. Give us a synopsis.
Sure. Well, I call it a theological novel, and theological thriller novel. Sorry, because it's a thriller, kind of in the vein of Silence of the Lambs, which is one of my favorite movies and novels of all time. And but it's not just about thrills and chills and scares and stuff like that. But I actually I want to wrestle through with the issues of human nature, the problem of evil, the existence of God, these primal sort of themes in drama, you know. And the premise of the story is that there's a brilliant serial killer who's actually a professor at a university. He captures university professors and he debates them. And the topic of the debate is his moral right to kill them. So he'll capture them, put them in a chair, tie them up type of thing, and videotape or, audio, record it, right? And he basically says, okay, if what you say is true about reality, then give me one valid reason why I should not kill you, and I will let you go. You can only imagine the failure of the various professors, whether they're evolutionary biologists, queer theorists, feminists, or what have you, as each of them takes a turn on his chair. And he's actually, his past is as a philosophy professor, but it's not just about an intellectual game, of course. He's actually also sort of sparring with the cop and psychologist who's tracking him down. And there's more to it that twists and turns, of course, that I don't want to reveal, but that's sort of the hook of the story for Cruel Logic, the Philosopher Killer. But there's also another element that I weave into the storyline. There's two dominant stories going on, and that is the serial killer, but also the university itself. It's sort of like the modern university as a woke institution now, since they're most all the institutions have been captured by this wokeness. I wanted to really show what that world is really like for a lot of people who still are ignorant, and there's still many people who just don't really know what's going on in the university environment, what they're actually teaching, and of course, the university has often been liberal in its past, but never before, as in these last 40 years or so, the leftism has grown into this wokeness, this worldview that is rooted in various perspectives, whether it's postmodernism, Marxism, sort of a hybrid of all these creatures, that that understands the world in binary categories of oppressed and oppressor. And this is also rooted in hatred of Western civilization and an attempt to overthrow Western civilization by denying all of its foundational categories. We of course see this going on in society, from taking down statues of Washington and Jefferson now, to the critical race theory that is a racist sort of worldview that is very similar to Nazism, only the races are inverted, right? And so that's been capturing a lot of these universities and institutions. And so I wanted to tell a story about a Christian freshman, first year at this fictional university in California, who gets caught up into the social justice movement because of his particular weaknesses as an evangelical Christian. And quite frankly, I wanted to deal with the ill-equipping that is a problem in the church in terms of not equipping Christians to be able to really deal with skepticism, doubt, unbelief, and such. But also I wanted to show that this wokeness is infecting everything. And it all a lot of it has originated in the university. But I didn't want to depict something that's fictional, merely fictional. I rooted everything that happens in my story to this character in the university, whether it's sex week on campus or student protests to administration, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, department. All this stuff that happens in my story is actually based on actual events that have occurred in the last 5 or 10 years. And so the storyline that goes on there is that the psychology professor is trying to fight to get a reinstatement of a Western civilization courses back into the freshman classes, right? And this is something that has happened even at Stanford in recent years, relatively recent years. Because Western civilization has been, like I say, has been attacked and attempted to be just rooted out of all people's thinking. Yeah. And what's at the foundation of Western civilization? Judeo-Christianity, the Bible. So this is the real ultimate enemy. The ultimate enemy of wokeness is Christianity and the Bible. And so all these things are sort of playing around, interacting with each other in this environment of the university while this serial killer is going about his business. And that's sort of the premise of the story.
I love that. Epic, yeah. There were so many things that you said that I was like, you could even take it another step further of like the school of thoughts, if you will, like the play on words. Like it is the school of thoughts that actually cause division within people, or even the belief that they're divided. And so when you believe that you're separated or divided from God himself, you'll start to behave in these manners. Yeah. And literally through the book, it's like, oh, it so weaves. You said something specifically of the oppressor versus oppressed thought process. Mm-hmm. And man, when you were talking about that, I was like, wow, that's actually the crux of so many things, is that we've viewed God as the oppressor. And so then people play the victim of like, oh, I'm oppressed. Yeah. And so when you see him in not a true light, it's like, really, it's like your book actually kind of exposed like, hey, this is actually the fruit of darkness, the fruit of you believing that God is the one oppressing you, or the lie of separation like Colossians talk about. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's kind of the fruit that you're kind of dealing with,
that's interesting.
Yeah,
it's like paint.
One of the dominant themes of the book is ideas have consequences. And
for sure,
when it is no surprise to most Christians that in a university, when you teach students that they are products of chance, not intelligent design, not created by a loving creator, that they're animals, morality is a social construct. All morality is a social construct. And then ultimately all relations reduce to power. This is the worldview of the dominant worldview of the woke movement. when you teach them that, it's no surprise then that they behave like animals without morals, who are only interested in power, and so that's definitely one of the intentions that I have in the story. But there's so cool. Another component of it is that which is one of the warnings I want to give to those who are Christians and such when they read the book. Sometimes they're shocked because there's some harsh language in there. There's some F-bombs and there's some harsh language, and it's coming out of the students mostly. And I just wanted people to understand when going in that there's some of that's in there, but I don't exploit it. My goal is to show reality, and reality is that the language of the university is highly charged and hateful and violent. So they use the F word in all their protests, F Beethoven, F, the Bible, all this stuff, F Western civilization. And I actually wanted to capture that reality, because if you don't accurately depict that language of hatred and violence, then the hatred and violence that come from that, which the story also goes into, there's a student uprising and protests start on campus, right? Then it's not going to make sense to them, right? Because part of the argument is language leads to behavior, and the way you speak when you speak with such hatred and violence, it's no surprise you end in violent actions. And so all of that is part of that paradigm of accurately depicting the evil in this world, so that the redemption that the story shows at the end will have actual power and impact. If you don't accurately depict evil, then it's not going to be a powerful story of redemption.
That's what I really appreciated. Like I said, I haven't read through the whole thing yet. I'm listening to it now, but from the opening pages, it's very real and gritty, and you don't hold back when it comes to like language and violence. And I love that, because it's like, okay, this is a legitimate, real story. There's no shying away from anything, and I love that. To
be fair, I mean, I don't show the gruesome acts of violence and such. It's more like crime scenes afterwards, and you do hear what happened to them. But, I try to draw a line where I don't become excessive about it. But you're right. It's like, it's a grit. I do call it gritty reality. And so
it's real.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. I think that is one of the key things personally, and just even in your writing and the way that you articulate things is like, you have two thoughts. I feel like you either have like the Christian thought that we have to water things down and kind of dummify it and, sugarcoat it, or you have people that are like, hey, this is actually just reality. Like, let's actually arise and shine and be the light. Like, let's look at redemption in the midst of all of the chaos and all of the confusion and all of the uprising is like, you actually have the light within you.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's what I really appreciate about all of your stuff is like, it really showcases redemption.
Yeah. And that's always been my argument for years in my storytelling is that the power of your redemption will only be equal to the accuracy of the evil that you're depicting that they're being redeemed from. So if you do a 1970s television like villain, people are going to know it doesn't ring true and it's just a silly story. And, but if you show the accurate, if you depict evil in a way that, wow, either I've seen that or that makes perfect sense, people will listen, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool.
But having said that, also it's not excessive, like I say. It's in there, the F-bombs are in there, but people just need to know, and some people can't handle it, and that's okay. It's not for everyone. But
just go walk on the street for a little bit. You'll hear somebody scream the F word.
Go live a real life, and you'll experience it.
I mean, if you're a Christian,
go have non-Christian friends.
Yeah, if you're a Christian, you don't hear that stuff around you. You're obviously not very much in the world, are you?
Right. But it seems like you even touch a bit on that as well. Some of that evangelical being raised in the Christian household, being sheltered. I've seen people in real life who have lived, who've grown up under a rock.
Yeah.
Not experiencing the real world. And when something happens, you're traumatized.
Yeah. So
by it.
There's something out there these days called Christian deconstruction or Christian deconversion. And, now with all the podcasts, we hear stories of, Christian celebrities, musicians, pastors who are doing their podcasts describing how they lost their faith, basically. And of course, this is nothing new. And, ever since universities went secular, we've had a history of Christians going to college and losing their faith. So that's nothing new. But this notion of this, this calling it the deconversion and such, I wanted to deal with it because I think that it does point to this lack of equipping that is going on in the body of Christ, in my opinion, in our churches. Christians are, it's not universal. I mean, there's always different sort of, groups within churches, different mentalities that we have out there. But I do think one significant mentality has been a sort of a pietistic viewpoint where it's like, our faith is about me, my relationship with Jesus and the church and Bible reading and scripture and all this. And it doesn't seek to really apply that to the real world around us. How do we apply the Bible to politics? How do we apply it to our institutions? Sometimes they don't believe it should be, right? So, but also part of this package, I think, particularly with evangelicalism, is it's the me and my Jesus type of Christianity. And so apologetics is frowned on. Oh, that's intellectualizing or what have you. Theology is intellectualizing. And so there's not a real attempt to address the skepticism, the doubts that are out there. And so, even like you go to a Christian school, maybe you're taught a minimal amount of material, but you're not really taught to face some of the harder things that you're going to face when you get into college. And these students go to college and they get faced with Bart Ehrman's type arguments that nobody in church has told them about because it's just too highfalutin. It's like, the textual transmission has, multiple problems, etc. And it's like, that's just too much gobbledygook, for my Christian faith, my Christian walk. Well, what happens is when you get presented with some of these problems, and they are real problems that need to be addressed and need to be answered, a lot of Christians get this feeling that it's like, I've been hoodwinked, or I haven't been told the truth by Christians, or they never told me about this stuff. And there is some truth to these problems with the Bible, but if you always are just dismissive and try to wrap it up with a quick answer rather than really going deep, you're not able to handle the Bart Ehrman type deep attacks on Christianity that comes your way, and that's where a lot of people will lose their faith. Couple that with other components that I think, like I said, the pietistic Christianity, but also this sort of, in my opinion, the obsession with the end times. We are in the last days. We are the special generation. We're going to be raptured at any moment. Look for the rapture. People will spend their time on this, and then it doesn't happen as it hasn't happened for hundreds and thousands of years. But it's like they keep saying we're the last generation, and then they keep changing all their interpretations. And then what happens is a lot of Christians start looking at this and going, and they're taught that this is what the Bible's teaching, rather than there are some prophetic interpretations that interpret it this way, interpret it that way, interpret that way, right, for the end times. Yeah. And but they're told that there's just this one way, and then when all these things don't happen, the rapture doesn't happen. Oh, the blood moons now are 6-8 years behind us. Oh, nothing happened. They start to realize, they start to think, well, then that means the Bible's not true, because they've linked this this peculiar obsession with the end times that I don't even think is biblical. But nonetheless, they've linked it, and then when things don't happen, they give up their faith because they've linked, an interpretation with the Bible itself. And we have to have interpretations. They're inescapable, but we have to understand and discern this difference between the different interpretations as well as the Word of God compared to the Word of God itself. And we seek to understand the Word of God through our interpretations, but we should never hold on to them as if they're the absolute Word of God itself, because our interpretations can be wrong, and they often are wrong. And so these are the kind of things that I think can make a Christianity weak and unable to really address the attacks against it.
Yeah, that's good. We had that conversation about the end time stuff all the time. But look at your theology. How does your eschatology make you live?
Yeah.
How does it affect the way that you live your life and react and all that stuff.
Show up in spaces. And
is it box in and, with your canned goods and tuck away? And it's turned me away. When I grew up, I remember hearing stories of, Jesus and all the biblical stories. And regardless if it was the intention or not, everywhere the church that I was in fully believed in it was the rapture stuff. And what stuck with me was hell, sin, rapture, end times, which kept me in a hamster wheel of, am I good? Am I forgiven?
Yeah.
Is he going to come back tomorrow? Am I going to be raptured? Am I going to be safe? And it keeps Christians in these little cycle balls over here.
Yeah, and
away from our destiny of being that light.
Yes, exactly.
And being.
They're more focused on trying to find the Antichrist than finding Christ. They're more focused on the escapist Christianity, which is like, we're going to be raptured out here anyway. So if you believe you're going to be raptured out before the hard times comes and things are just going to get worse and worse, well, you're not going to try to do much about making society better, are you? And yet the Bible very clearly says we're supposed to. That's the cultural mandate in Genesis. Genesis, what was it? Genesis 1-3. Just to to make the world better by applying your faith to the world around you. That's how you love your neighbor. You don't love your neighbor by just connecting the dots and waiting to be taken out of here. But that's one component. But there's another, there are other aspects where, I also deal with the novel. I deal with the problem that sexual problems that some Christians have that are unwilling to deal with, like pornography is one issue that is a problem in the church, and it's not being dealt with enough, with enough transparency and honesty to really face the problems that are going to come down the pike. And so that's in there as well. So there's a lot of this stuff that kind of goes into the package. But the broader picture of the secular godless culture, it's sort of like when you reject God, when you get rid of the transcendent objective morality rooted in this transcendent objective God, when you get rid of that, both on a personal level, also on a societal level or in a cultural level, when that happens, there are logical consequences that ultimately, it may not happen right away because you're still living off the borrowed capital of that faith. But as time goes on, the polarization gets more clear as people become more consistent with their godless worldview, such as, if you believe that morality is a social construct, then yes, of course, ultimately power is the only God of this world. And that's what my argument is, precisely that there's really only two gods that people worship, either the living God or power. And so if you reject the living God, you're ultimately going to be driven by power. Now there'll be people who say, oh no, that's not true. I'm an atheist, but I believe in morality. Yeah, that's true. You may believe in morality, but you're living off the borrowed capital of Christianity, because in fact, there is no moral right and wrong if there is no transcendent God. If all we are is a collection of atoms colliding with one another, right? If there's no spiritual reality, no God, then all we have is the contest of wills in conflict, and the strong will wins, and that's power. Yeah. Power is might makes right. And any time that a person who might say they're an atheist and say, oh, it's wrong, racism is wrong, well, I'm sorry, but if you look at history, racism is very much a part of people's reality, good or bad, whether you like it or not. And the truth is without a transcendent moral to say your feelings don't define reality, objective truth does. If you don't have that, you can't say that racism is objectively wrong, because there are many people who subjectively believe in it, just like there are many who subjectively believe in genocide. So all these claims of genocide's wrong, racism was wrong, you have no foundation in an atheistic or unbelieving worldview to actually prove that anything is morally right or wrong. And that's the thing that I think most unbelievers never really think through. And that's one of the purposes of me telling this story, because, It was rooted in, it actually originated many years ago. I've always loved apologetics, and apologetics is a unique sort of a thing. It can be intellectual sometimes, and it's not for everybody, I realize. And, the different levels of how deep you may go into it. But I've always loved it in philosophy and such. And I've always had a hard time trying to make it interesting to other Christians who weren't interested in it, right? Mm-hmm. But the best way to really get someone to get interested in it is to have them confront an unbeliever that just demolishes them, and they realize they have no foundation for arguing to defend their faith, like First Peter 3:15, 3:16 says or something, where it's always be ready to provide a defense for the hope that is in you. Well, so I think I'm losing my track of my thought here. Sorry about that. I lost my train of thought.
No, you're good.
I lost my train of thought.
Good.
So,
I want to comment on that really quick.
Oh, go ahead.
About I was hoping we could get into the origin of like where this came from.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. Sorry, that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
I went off the track there. So I love apologetics.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to this guy named Walter Martin. So he was an old rascally apologetics guy back in the 70s, okay? And he had a great sense of humor, but he was also, he was fun to listen to. And I listened to a lot of his tapes, and he was describing on the show way back in the 60s, the Long John Nebel show, he was describing his frustration talking to an atheist, trying to help the atheist realize that he doesn't think through his beliefs. He has these beliefs, but he doesn't think through them consistently. And he's saying, look, you have no foundation for morality. And the atheist going, yes, I do. I believe in morality. I believe murder's wrong. He's like, but you don't have a basis to believe in it. What are you talking about? So Walter got so frustrated, he said, okay, he thought of this analogy. He said, okay, it's 1940s Germany, and I'm a Nazi with a gun pointed at you, and you're a Jew. Give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot you. And that, of course, stumped the guy and made him think. But I never forgot that, obviously, because that's sort of the premise of this novel, but with a serial killer. But I never forgot that because it is a powerful, storytelling is such a powerful way for embodying, in a sense, embodying a logical argument. You could sit there and we could talk about, our premises A and B, and if A, then B, et cetera, But if you actually show that lived out in people's lives and how certain worldviews lead to certain consequences, if you live consistently with them, right? I think that that's a powerful way of showing the inconsistency or the inability of a worldview to have an actual moral foundation to it. And that is, as a Christian, that's what I would argue, is that no other worldview has a foundation for legitimately arguing any objective morality whatsoever. It's just everyone's subjective feelings, and we're all in conflict. There's no standard that transcends us to tell us who's right and who's wrong. So, but the Christian God, of course, says it doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter if you think racism is right or you think it's wrong. It's wrong no matter what you feel. But in today's world, particularly the postmodern, the woke world of this is what I feel. I feel I'm a boy inside, or I feel I'm a girl inside, or, I feel I'm, whatever, transgender. My feelings define reality, and then they try to force you to accept that reality, right? That's the sort of mentality that's going on here. That's an idolatry of the subjective. And so the transcendent objective God of the scriptures, just completely invalidates all of that kind of thinking. But it's the only way to address it. Because if there is no God, then it's just going to be whoever has the most power is going to win. And right now, the woke forces control the power in society, and then one day they won't.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, I love it. I love the whole story of that. When you hit on that scripture about, just apologetics and the philosophy of things, and, but I love that because I feel like that's actually a linchpin, that scripture that you referenced in 1 Peter.
Yeah.
Because it's actually about the hope within you. You can have a lofty argument and you can try and debate or whatever, but also if you don't actually have the hope, if you actually haven't connected to Jesus himself, it doesn't matter how compelling your argument will be, there's no transference. The light within them wouldn't even resonate. And I can see that just even, woke society, like on the legitimate side of things, it's like Jesus didn't argue with people. He transformed people.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, he kept telling the Pharisees, if we're going to be real honest, going all the way back to your ill-equipping of the church, he kind of got onto them more than he did anybody else.
Yeah.
And how things kind of rolled.
But, and one thing he told them too was like the kingdom is in you.
The Pharisees, did, yeah.
I think the world, there's that thing inside of people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the morality that maybe that's why they feel that they're moral, is like there is that seed in there that's
the seed of eternity
cultivated, that they don't know why it's there, but it is connected to Jesus.
Yeah.
But then the hope, like being able to, explain that, that's transformation, and seeing true hope is like, it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's relationship coupled with these things that.
Yeah. With understanding.
Yes. With understanding, which is what you're talking about. And Brian, what you're saying too about like even the apologetics and stuff, and like as Christians, we have the Holy Spirit that leads us into all truth. We should be able and willing to question everything. If we don't understand something, seek him on it and ask him to unravel it through somebody else or whatever it may be. Like, hey, lead me into truth and help me understand this difficult question that I have.
Yeah.
But I also think it's beautiful because that is what you've done, Brian, in this book is like the storytelling component is what causes that. Like it unravels people, like people who are searching, people who are like, hey, I want to know truth. I want to know, like, Lord, lead me into all this understanding. When you actually have, I think, real books, whether they're quote unquote fiction or not, like whatever that looks like. But when people are choosing to storytell truth, it's captivating. That's why I think Jesus always did parables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people knew how to connect.
And I think you've done with this book, what's really cool is like you've boiled down all these things that are out there, the craziness and the ideas. You've boiled it down into these like immediate pockets, and like you can clearly almost divvy it up and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my goal. Was I wanted to deal with all these ethical systems, and I didn't want it to be a textbook. As a storyteller, my number one priority is to be entertaining.
Love it.
And my number one priority is to tell meaningful stories. In other words, I have two number one priorities, and they're always equal. So even though everything I write, I want to have meaning in it, I actually absolutely have to have it to be entertaining, because that's part of the power of story and art. And it's by drawing the reader in, the audience into the story, is how you, and the suspension of disbelief, it's how they open the minds up to what the storyteller is telling through the actual drama of the story. Now, even though I'm doing, but I wanted to bring this apologetics sort of analysis of all these godless worldviews, secular worldviews, ethical systems like might makes right, or is utilitarianism proper ethics? Because ethics is, one of the foundational streams of philosophical thinking, right? You have metaphysics, ontology, you have knowledge, which is epistemology, and then you have ethics, which is morality. Those are the three sort of dominant components of philosophy. And I wanted to go through all these various ethical worldviews to deconstruct them and show them. But I realized, though, that can be very boring to people, and especially if you get, you're quoting Hobbes and Rousseau and all these historical characters that nobody cares about, philosophers. Maybe Aristotle sounds interesting to some people, but, I recognize philosophy is not as interesting to people. But I thought, well, look, I'm going to put it into this story where this serial killer is actually debating with people, keep them in bite-sized chunks. And so far, people have been telling me it works. It challenges them just enough. They may not know all the things about philosophy, but they're getting the vibe of the discussion and the debate. They're understanding what's actually being argued. And it gives them a glimpse into this world of philosophy without being boring, and actually makes it quite interesting and exciting. So I figured, as I was coming, one of the reasons why I've always loved the story was because it connected two of my most favorite genres would be philosophy and serial killers,
Yes.
And I thought, well, that's one way to make philosophy interesting. Connect it up with serial killers, At least that's on a shallow level, of course. But the serial killer becomes the embodiment, if you think about it, for forcing people to face the consequences of their ideas, right?
Yeah.
And the serial killer, so to speak, is the sociopath, the psychopath who doesn't have the conscience, who doesn't have a morality, and he lives beyond good and evil, like Nietzsche would say, right?
Yeah.
And people hear of these monsters in stories and movies and such, but they're really all around us, and our society is actually going down that path. How is it that our society has gotten to the point where, what is it, like 70% of the students in colleges believe in genociding the Jews on behalf of Palestine, as Palestinians? It's like, what? How could we could never believe we've gotten to that point. Well, ideas have consequences. And if you teach them these paradigms, they'll get to the point where they believe genocide is actually a good thing. That's unthinkable. Especially my generation, of course, I didn't go through the Holocaust, but the prior generation did. So we were taught all about the Holocaust, and the whole notion of genocide, which really kind of the term genocide was coined when the Armenians were first genocided by the Turkish Muslims in sometime around after World War I. So that term, although obviously through history that had been going on, but that term was actually originated then. But since the Holocaust, our generation, the last couple of generations, has been really conditioned to see genocide as a horrible thing. But now the new generation of kids, they actually accept it as long as it's genocide against their hated oppressors. See? Yeah. So we're all, one generation, we could lose it all. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just shocking. It's shocking to me, but that's because ideas have consequences. So you teach these people, these kids, these things, then it's no surprise that they end up behaving this way. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I think it's, what it looks like for me is a very poor representation of God on behalf of, and it's not all our fault. We're all taught different things growing up, but it's an awful representation of God. But then here on the other side is this strategic darkness saying, hey, we accept you. Come here, have something to live for, have something to fight for, which everybody wants. And it's like those false identities are open arms. Like, hey, we're here for you. Well, and that acceptance is the doorway into that thing, it seems.
Yeah, I agree. I want to say that that's the power of deception in any godless system is going to be how there's truth in every lie, right? So they have to have just enough truth in it. This is why the social justice movement carries such weight with people, or it pulls them in, because it masquerades as compassion for the marginalized. But what it really is, it's rooted in hatred for those who are in the majority. It's actually rooted in hatred and ultimately violence against those people who are in the majority in order to take their power and overthrow them, as if those people are oppressors, right? And so it's redefining those who are in the majority as oppressor, which makes them evil and bad. But the thing of it is, it still argues a moral system, doesn't it? Which is kind of interesting, right? So even the very notion of oppressed and oppressor has this intrinsic morality to us that oppressor is bad, oppressed is good, is the good people, right? But in truth, if you don't have a Christian God to define good and evil, then oppressed and oppressor means nothing. There's no difference between oppressed and oppressor. It's just power and powerless. And it doesn't, and to say that those who are in power are bad or oppressing is bad is meaningless. It's a meaningless statement. It's like saying, well, that evil lion for eating the gazelle. Look, that lion's evil for eating a gazelle. No, that's just the way nature works. So if you only accept nature without a transcendent morality, then you can't argue that oppression is bad. But of course, everyone's created in the image of God, and so therefore there's always a attempt on the unbeliever's side, whether it's woke or leftism or what have you. There's always the attempt to cast their worldview in moral terms, and that's where they fool people, basically. That's where they fool Christians, right, with this whole compassion thing. And because, who doesn't? I don't want to be a racist. Do you want to be a racist? No, of course not. Right. So maybe we should be anti-racist until you get into it and you realize that anti-racism is actually racism that's been changed and redefined to justify its own racial hatred. So you have to look a little deeper into these things. But my point is just simply that, ironically, even those who don't really have an ultimate moral foundation will still argue morally. But I think that's because we're all creating the image of God, and we have that intrinsic need to have moral justification for things. But it's the challenge to the unbeliever to say, okay, that's great, you have these moral feelings, that's great, but your atheism does not comport with your claims of morality. If your atheism is true, then the definition of oppressor as bad or evil is nothing. It's nothingness. It's ridiculous. It's not true at all. Oppressor and oppressed are just simply categories of nature, and no different than the lion and the gazelle, right? Yeah. And so these are the kind of things that I think apologetics helps to force people to look at and to reconsider their ideas. And doing it in a story, helps you see it from within a human drama rather than just intellectual argumentation, which has its place. But I recognize not everybody appreciates that as much as others.
Yeah. Well, I think I love that. I think the real thing that I love, though, is within the story, what changes people's minds is when they have a greater experience, when they feel something. Like, you can argue and wrestle in thought, right? Like, we can debate, but not until you're like pricked in the heart do you change your mind. The repentance is actually just changing your mind. And it's like, not until people feel it. And that's what I love about your story is like, people can they can feel the effects of like, you know what, I've actually believed in this bipolar view of like black and white, oppressor versus oppressed, like, and I see how much that pain that is and how much that actually has been driving me. And that's where I think, because I don't know, I always think in terms of that, like at the human level, being able to bring it all the way back into a human experience. And it's all driven by emotion. It's all driven by how is this thing making me feel?
It's transformative.
So you either have your wokeism that makes me feel like I'm a part of a group that's the greater good, that we're pushing for this thing of whatever.
Justice.
Yeah, justice,
So you have this side, but then you also have the other side of people where you can actually be motivated by love. And you're like, hey, actually, I see you. Like, you're not these ideas and these concepts that you think you are. And like, I don't know. I love that whole idea of like, we can actually bring out and help heal people of the pain that they're in, because that's the only reason people are even operating in these social justice groups. It's because they don't realize that they're loved, nor have they had the experience of love. Because once you've had the experience of love, you can't rationalize yourself out of it.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
and there's something about like with transformation and stuff like that, these people, you can tell them things and they'll just shut off immediately. There's something about a safety of opening up to something, saying, let me chew on this and consider it. Even if it's in a secret place. It's like Nicodemus going to Jesus in the middle of the night. Like, is this okay? But I think that's what kind of opens up the possibility of a repentance or a mind change.
Yeah.
It's like my forgiveness story. As I was on my lunch break. I've told this 1,000 times. I'll sum it up. But I'd been reading the Bible like a madman years and years ago, and I was on a lunch break, 5-minute lunch break, and I just prayed, like, Lord, I have this blockage. What is it? And it was this forgiveness, this bitterness that I had held on against my father, this unforgiveness and stuff. And I just said, could you show me how to release that? And simultaneously, I had scriptures coming in of like, forgive them. They know not what they do, as they're beating him and spitting on him. And it was like a heart change or a mind swap of like Jesus, me releasing my heart to him and him giving me his. And I understood it. I was like, oh, he did not understand what he did. And it was just an understanding and a click and a righteousness that locked in. I'm like, that was real. And it was tied to scripture, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something that no one can take away from me.
You make a good point, and I think that the method of how to reach people, that can be a sticky issue because there's many different ways, and even Jesus himself reacted differently to different types of people, right?
Yeah.
And I think that on one level, I think you're right, which is why if we can, certainly on an individual level, you know, if you're interacting with someone who's woke, we have a commonality, right? I mean, you want justice, right? Yeah, well, I want justice too, and I'm against racism too, and so we can find a common ground where we can try to lead them to. But here is the love of the transcendent God, who actually can be the one who offers justice in this world and in the next, etc. And there's that level where we need to be gracious, loving, and kind, and sometimes long-suffering of abuse, right? I mean, verbal abuse or what have you. But then there's another component but in the broader society at large, there is a violence and a hatred that is driving this movement. And these people are out to destroy us, literally. Like, they want to demonetize us, deplatform us, and literally make us starve to death. Yeah. So, you know, and I've heard, it's funny, I heard Tucker Carlson mention this, and I agree with him. It's like, you have to understand the long-term vision of these people is they want you dead. Yeah. They want us dead. And that's real. And that is something, at least on a social, societal level, we have to address this stuff with firm truth and destroying the lies and deceit, right? Because the ultimate end is to kill us in some way, put us in jail, starve us, what have you. And so that's a real thing too. And sometimes that requires us to have a little bit more than just a personal one-on-one interaction with a person. We have to fight this evil in society, or it will kill us. And so there's that component as well, if that makes any sense.
Different arenas of it, yeah.
What does that look like to you on the practical side of things, to fight it in the global? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, think globally, act locally. That's for sure. This is where politics gets involved, not in terms of political parties, but in terms of politics simply is externalized religion. In other words, we believe in loving our neighbor. Well, what does that mean? Do we give our neighbor a bunch of money, free money, or do we challenge him to take responsibility for his life and help him, get a foot up, but then take responsibility? Though that's politics, right? And so the truth is whether you're standing for welfare or private charity, those are outgrowths of your faith, and so we should be. But also the way these people think. Okay, so conservatives. I'm a conservative. Conservatives are at a disadvantage. We want to conserve what is good, and we don't want to just jump into everything that's new, and so sometimes we're slow to change, but nonetheless, we're trying to preserve what is good. But also conservatives tend to have a laissez-faire attitude in terms of, it's like, leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. Don't impose on me, I won't impose on you, right? It's that sort of live and let live mentality, which I think results in not being involved in society. Whereas liberals, leftists and leftists and the woke, they believe that they believe in collectivism, which is that we as individuals only exist as a part of the greater groups that we're a part of, right? And so we're not really we don't really have individual agency. We're just products of our group identities, right? And so they're collectivists. So therefore, they believe that the way to help society is not to live and let live; it's to get in, take control, and make society the way it should be. And that's why they're more politically involved. And so conservatives need to get up off their duffs and get involved and start at the local level. Make sure you're voting at all your elections. It's a small way to start, but it's real. Get involved in some of those parties in engagements in your local community, whatever it might be. The laws and the regulations that you're dealing with are reflections of what you believe is good for society. And then, of course, obviously, make it grow from there as well. But focus on starting locally. Get involved is the point. Don't just live your life, and make your comments on social media as if you're doing something. When you're commenting on social media, you're not. Yeah, you're speaking out, and that's good, but you're not doing anything to make the world better. And so you need to actually be involved physically in doing things better. And what better way? Get involved in your church. Church has many ministries, but ministries to the poor, ministries to the marginalized, but also ministries for promoting the truth, gospel evangelism and stuff like that, right? But politics, we need to become more politically involved, because that's how we've lost everything. Is we don't want to get involved because we don't like controlling people's lives. But you have to, it's your moral responsibility in a constitutional republic to be engaged in government, because that it is of the people and by the people. So you have to do something, just because, so you have to get over this mentality of, I don't know, politics is an evil thing, or politics is a waste of time. Yeah, it's hard work, and it is just full of corruption through and through. But it's through politics that the left has taken control of all the institutions. And it's what they're doing now. God knows what's going to happen with the next election because of what they've been doing. So we have to become more involved. We have to apply our beliefs to society, not just to ourselves and to our families.
I want to answer your question as well, Marlia. One thing, Brian, as well, that I think you are doing is something I think everybody should do. You're wielding your God-given ability for good in writing these stories and doing these things. And it's something that aligns with, I know you find joy in it. It
Sure.
comes out through your writing. But I think that's something everybody can do as well. You're using it on this scale that can change people. It has the capacity to change minds. Like we're saying, when you even reading the book, it presents you with thoughts. It presents you with the ability, the invitation to think about things.
Well, and
internally,
what you guys are doing is the same thing. You're examining these issues, wrestling through them, trying to get the truth out of, and get that truth out to the world. But not everyone has our skills. Not everyone's a communicator, an artist, or anything. Most people aren't, actually, if you think about it, right? Most people just have their lives, their jobs, and their families, and maybe they have a hobby or something. But everyone has something. Everyone has some skill or some talent or something. But so maybe you can't do what you and I are doing, but you can do other things, and you have to seek that out. And you can begin by getting involved through church ministry and through political involvement to apply those, find out what your gifts are, and find some way to get involved in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's a place for where anyone is at to be faithful in that place, to wield your authority as a human being, as a
bearer of light.
Yes, as a bearer of light, as a new creation. I think you can wield that in those spaces.
I think for me, a massive key is if you're like, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know what that looks like. Like, there are some people that just don't feel passionate about politics, and they're like, just for whatever reason, I can't connect to it. It's like, just go look at what Jesus did. Emulate him wherever you're at, and that actually will also transcend. And then you'll feel inspired by what you should connect to, because then you're more in your true person, meaning you'll have more light that actually shines. You're not trying to force a thing. It's like, man, I think being so true to who you really are, who the Lord's called you to be, who the Lord created you to be, is so far more impactful than we even give it credit for. Then, I think it's a massive key. But if you're like, I don't know where to start, it's like, go look at what he did. Emulate him, because he's the foundation. He is the plumb line. He is the measuring stick for all of us. Just go look at him. Watch how he walked, and do that.
Yeah. And I have a, oh gosh, where was I going with it? I just lost my thought.
I'll jump in
then. Do it.
And look, but even then I say you don't even have, the other thing is I think one of the big misnomers is Christians particularly have this, I think we've all become victims of this subjective worldview, that everything's got to be subjective and passionate and all this. And some people, I know a lot of people who don't really have much of a passion. It's like, well, get involved in the church. Well, I don't have any real passion for anything particularly to do. I don't, I do. I have a calling in my life and I'm passionate about it, but I recognize not everybody may have a passion for something, or something. Oh, that looks good to me, but you don't have to. Just find out where if you don't have the passion, then go to your church, find out where there is a need and just fulfill it. And you might find, oh, I really like this. Or maybe you might realize, this isn't for me and I'll try something else. That's all. It's quite easy to do.
That's a good point.
And by the way, I believe doing something like, being involved in your church ministry to the poor is the most political active thing, because you're engaging in private charity rather than public charity, rather than government charity, which is not biblical. And so it's like, that's political involvement. So it's how your perspective is. But the bottom line is find an interest or passion, but if you don't have one, then just try anything where there's a need. And then you might find that you actually end up loving it. I've known many friends where that's actually been the case. Even so, something so small as like a coffee ministry. I have a brother and sister. They didn't know what they could do, but there was a need in the coffee ministry church. Oh, how can that be much of a help? Well, they are ministering every Sunday. They get to minister to people every Sunday, they find, just by being in the coffee ministry. So it actually, you'd be surprised the things that happen. But yeah, if you don't have the passion, then just where's the need? And just fulfill the need.
That's good.
That is
sometimes
good.
The way, I know we've said this before or heard it, but sometimes the way out of a rut is to help somebody, do something good for somebody. Just make the decision to do it without feeling it. Sometimes that pulls you right out of it. It reactivates your heart.
Always for me. I mean, I'm a very selfish person. And I know that when I start feeling particularly, unappreciated or unloved or something like that, it's like, I know my answer is, then you need to reach out and love and give to someone else. If you're not feeling given to, that's always the answer for me. And I've known that, I've tried to live that way, but as a selfish person, I know it's pretty easy.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a powerful tool to have in your belt. I think it's the one that a lot of people don't know is there. But
well, Brian, this was awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to add, leave our listeners with?
Well, just that all my books, Cruel Logic, is exclusively on Amazon. It's in paperback, hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. And large print too. I now do large print. So all of that's at Amazon. And if you want to, look more into me, you can go to Godawa.com, and I've got a cool website with a lot of cool information there. And those are the two.
Yeah.
And all the rest of your awesome books.
Yes, all of them. Yeah. And Cruel Logic, what do you call the narrator? The guy that reads all the voices is incredible as well. Yeah, he does every voice, and he's a different person each time he does it. He's very good.
Yeah, I love him. He's great.
I love the serial killer. Yes, Bill, that's him. And I love the serial killer aspect of it too.
Cool.
Got Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
Catch that vibe in there.
This guy.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Everybody, check out Brian. Check out his books, his content.
We'll leave all the links and stuff in the bottom of the show notes.
Yes.
So. All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Thanks, Brian, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ancient Way podcast, drop us a like, share with your friends, share with your family. And if you'd like to support us and what we are doing, and you would like to play a direct role in our growth and things that we do in the future,
we have a donation spot at the bottom of our show notes. So you can click on that, give however much you want. We appreciate absolutely everything. We appreciate our listeners, and everybody that's already come alongside and encouraged us, and even everybody that's been on our show. So thanks, guys.